been practicing calm abiding or shamatha with an object. So first the object was our breath, and then the object became the mind stream. But in both these cases, there was the subject, which is the mindfulness or the awareness, and the object, the breath or the mind stream. So this morning we are going now to have a shamatha without an object, objectless shamatha. So this a little bit depends on our having prior cultivated the quality of being aware. You know, if we're not aware, then it doesn't work. But if we have now begun to get that feeling of the observer, of the awareness, either while observing the breath or observing the thinking process, then this next step is relatively easy. In fact, it's the easiest meditation. But because it's easy to attain, but it's difficult to sustain, put it that way. So all it is, it's very simple, is that we first bring our attention to the breath or the mind. So we have that sense of awareness, of mindfulness, of observing, and then whatever it is we're observing, right? And then all we need to do is drop the object. So then we are just aware, not aware of something. You understand? So this is why it's called objectless. Right? Because normally when we are mindful, we're mindful of something. Now we're just mindful. So it's like, there you are, right? So it's actually very simple. Don't be intimidated. The problem is that then the conceptual mind wants to grab at it and say, oh yes, look, now I'm being aware of being aware. Oh look, it's easy, blah, 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 and we've lost it again, right? But there is that moment of open, it's a very open, spacious sense of just being. We're not doing anything. We're just aware of being aware. You understand? Yes. No? Okay, so I'll say it again. Normally, when we are aware of something. So there is the subject, the awareness, and the object, whatever it is that we are focusing on. So now what we are doing is simply dropping whatever it is we are focused on. So we are just in a state of awareness. Normally, well, let's put it another way. The fact that you hear me, the fact that you see me, the fact that we can think about what's being said is because we're aware, we're conscious, right? Awareness conscious. We're conscious. If you were not conscious, you would, even I'm talking, you wouldn't hear me, right? Even I'm sitting here, you wouldn't see me, because you are not aware, you are not conscious. So normally, our consciousness is attached to either our five senses, our seeing, hearing, tasting, touching, smelling, or to thinking, right? The sixth consciousness is the mental consciousness. So always the consciousness is attached to an object. So because of that, because the consciousness is connected to the senses or the mental consciousness, we are usually not conscious of being conscious. You understand? We're caught up in seeing, hearing, thinking. But we're not, it's like we get caught up in all the clouds and the rainbows and the thunder and the lightning. We don't see the sky. So now we are like, now you can go out and you can see this clear blue sky, no clouds, no rainbows, no thunder and lightning, just sky. I'll put it another way. If you come in here and we say, again, what is here? This is very important. If I ask you, what is in this tent? You will say, well, there were cushions, there was a platform, there was a table, there was a chair, there were people, there were pillars. But what there really is space. But nothing could exist here if it was not for the space. Right? But we cannot see or grasp the space. So we ignore it. But without space, nothing could exist. And of course, as we know, even the tables and the people and the cushions are ultimately space. Right? We're all space. I mean, if we took a human being, you're looking puzzled, madam. If we took a human being and reduced them down into their ultimate entities, it's all space and vibrations. I mean, quantum physics has proved this. You know, there is nothing solid. We feel very solid, and if I punched Tech Cho, he would definitely feel it. But nonetheless, ultimately speaking, it's all space and vibrations. So we solidify space. And that's our relative reality in which we live. But ultimately, everything is this open spaciousness. So this includes the mind. The mind is this open spacious awareness, but because we're so busy connecting with our senses, and especially our mental faculty, we don't notice the spaciousness inside our mind. The mind seems very enclosed and running around frantically in this limited space because we are not recognizing our open, spacious awareness, which is behind it all, and without which we could not see or hear or taste or think. Right? Right? So what we are trying to do now is just be aware of being aware. Just be conscious of being conscious, not conscious of something. Just rest in the actual awareness. It's like if you come in here and instead of looking at all the things, you just look at space. I mean, we can actually just be conscious of space. Normally we overlook it, but it's there and we can be aware of it. Likewise, the inner space, we can know it. it's also, if you know, awareness is also a knowing. We know. And so what we have to know is the knowing. Just be conscious of knowing. Just be conscious of being aware without being aware of anything in particular. Just that primal act of awareness, which is always present, but as I say, normally gets covered up by the fact that we're always using the awareness to be aware of something and not being aware of the awareness. So this is very important and leads us back to eventually to a very deep level of our consciousness, our bare, naked awareness, which is our true nature, which is something quite different from our usual just busy thinking mind. Okay? Got it? You don't have to do anything. All you need to do is, well, this is the whole point, that you don't do anything. This is why it's difficult. Because we always think we have to do something. What do I do? Well, the whole point is we don't do anything. We drop doing. Okay? So it's very easy. Don't get self-conscious about this. Usually, if we do it, initially the experience will only last for a few seconds. And then the egoic conceptual mind will grasp onto it and it's lost. But it doesn't matter. It's always emphasized that it's sessions of short duration than trying to extend it, because extending it becomes artificial. Of itself, it will naturally begin to sustain itself. The other thing I should mention perhaps at this point is that if we are doing the meditation on looking at the mind, as our awareness becomes more focused and stronger, then the mind of itself begins to calm down and it goes slower. It's like if you can imagine like a movie projector, you know, so then you've got the screen and then you've got all these little transparent frames in the projector, which is running extremely fast. So it looks, and behind that is a very powerful light. This light is the power of our awareness. It shines through all these little transparent thought frames and projects out our reality, right? So normally it's going so fast, it looks like it's really happening. As our awareness becomes more powerful, of itself, these thoughts, the running of the film begins to slow down. In other words, less conceptual thinking arises. It becomes, as it says in the text, like a slow stream just rippling by. Then, if our awareness is very powerful, it can happen that the last frame and the next frame, between them, there is a gap. And in that gap, between the last thought and the next thought, there is an open space. You know, if you could think of it, it's like the light shines through onto this open screen. And that gap, that space between the past thought and the future thought is one with the awareness which is perceiving it. And so at that moment, we recognize the nature of the mind. Do you understand?
And then I realized that I'm in the moment, and then the ego comes.
Exactly. So that only lasts for a few seconds. She's saying, and then I realize it, I recognize it, and then the ego comes back. Of course, it's not so easy. But my Lama, Kampa Rinpoche, he said, when you recognize the nature of the mind, then you can start to meditate. Right? Because at that point, you understand what we are actually looking for. What we're looking for is to gradually sustain and lengthen that pure awareness, which usually at the beginning we just glimpse for a moment, and then, as you say, the ego mind takes over. So what we try to do then is to, you see, this is where it gets very subtle, because of course then the ego wants to do that again. But the ego cannot do that. And so this is why it's always saying, just relax, don't hope for anything. Just follow the instructions. That's enough. Because the minute we try to reproduce an experience, we've already blocked it. This is why many people, when they first start to meditate, they have no preconceptions about what they're doing or why they're doing it. They're told, do this, and they sit down and they do it. And they get very powerful experiences sometimes because their mind is very unfabricated. You know, they have no expectations. They don't know what they're doing anyway. And so it all just happens. But then immediately the ego jumps in and says, wow, fantastic, I'm almost enlightened right now, you know. And then that acts as a very powerful block. So it's very important to practice without any expectations one way or the other. Just do it to do it, and that's enough. Huh?
Sometimes when you stop the breath, there is like this gap. Is it helpful to stop the breath?
Well, I think the point is not to try to stop the breath, but sometimes the breath of itself just stops. In this type of meditation, the whole point is not to try to fabricate something, but to allow the process to unfold itself. Otherwise, again, it just becomes something which we're manufacturing, which isn't genuine. So here always the problem is just that, as I say, once we have gained some understanding, some glimpse of the understanding, not to, we have to continue with the practice, but at the same time without any hopes and fears. And especially not judging our meditation sessions. Oh, that was a good session. Oh, that was a terrible session. The very fact that we are just doing it is enough. And we shouldn't be evaluating ourselves the whole time, nor should we have hope and fear.
Yesterday you talked about this alertness that comes with the mindfulness. Like there is someone who watches, like a self-knower. So this self-knower doesn't judge, but he sees the outside.
Yeah. Just a minute, I have to say this. She's talking about, yesterday we were talking about the witness or the self-knower who is observing the mind but not judging.
So this observer noticed that there is this gap that I started thinking.
Exactly.
And I cannot let it go. This perceiver, it doesn't vanish. He goes with me all the time, and he just he's observing, and he is the one that grasps that there is no thinking, and then you see?
I think what she's saying is that this self-knower is the one who recognizes the gap but it doesn't then dissolve. It stays as a knower, and it's the one that holds on and grasps. Is that what you're saying? Well, normally, if one is in a state of pure awareness, then there is no sense of knower or known. The two go together, because the whole point is that at the beginning there is a mindfulness, yes, and the mindfulness is a sense of a knower, a witness. But then when we are aware of being aware, that dissolves the sense of a knower into another deeper level of awareness, in which the whole sense of subject and object dissolve. Right? So there is, in a way, it's like three levels we're dealing with, right? First there's the gross conceptual mind. Then there is the witness, the knower, who observes the gross level of the mind. Then if we turn that awareness into looking at the awareness, which actually ultimately you can't do, but you're not supposed to tell you that. It's like the eye trying to see itself. But what happens is that then the whole edifice of subject and object drops away into another much profounder level of non-dualistic awareness, right? Which is the nature of the mind. That unborn, deathless awareness lies behind that knower, that sense of knowing. It's an even more subtle, it's like space because you can't see it. But it is our pure awareness. It's from which everything else comes up. So in order to gain that and to gain stability in that unborn awareness, which is the clear light nature of the mind, we need to stabilize first our mindfulness. Because without mindfulness, it's very difficult to sustain that other deeper level of awareness. But eventually that sense of knower and known dissolves. Right? So this is what we're trying to do now. We're not actually trying to get back to our unborn awareness, but what we are trying to do is to just rest in that level of being conscious, of being aware, which normally, as you're saying, we're aware of something. Now we're just aware, right? We're not aware of anything in particular. There's just that state of knowing. It's like we're like, as I say, like a paraglider. You know, you're just hovering there without being aware of anything in particular. If the things come into the mind, let them go. It doesn't matter. Don't think you have to be blank. It's not a blank state. It's a state of suddenly waking up. So the mind shouldn't feel, blanked out, zombie-like. Very fine-tuned, like a camera which suddenly comes into sharp focus, but without focusing on anything in particular. It's just a state of vivid awareness, which is a very open, clear state. It's like suddenly waking up. In some ways, what comes into my mind, it's a bit like, did any of you, you're all a bit too young, but did any of you ever see The Wizard of Oz? Okay, well, in The Wizard of Oz, if you remember, when she's in Kansas, it's all in black and white. And then she arrives in Oz and it all comes into Technicolor. right? So it's like that. Suddenly everything goes into Technicolor. So what I mean is that it's not a state of becoming more blurred or less conscious. It's a state of becoming fully conscious, really waking up, which normally we cannot sustain for very long at first, and we fall back again. But it's so we know we've got it when things become more vivid, not when they become, we just kind of, as I say, go into a blank state. It's the opposite of blank. Okay? So we're all going to try this. It's very easy. You can do it any time. You don't need to do it when you're sitting formally. Any time during the day, you can just suddenly just stop. That's all. I mean, it only takes a few seconds, so no excuse there's no time. Just stop and in that moment be aware. Not aware of anything in particular, just aware. Right? And just leave that mind in that very open, spacious clarity. Luminous clarity, it's called. You can, that's a good question. Of course, in the Dzogchen tradition especially, they have their eyes wide open. In the Mahamudra tradition, they usually have their eyes down. But actually, to have your eyes open is good, because you're connecting the outer space with the inner space. But actually, at this point, it doesn't really matter, whatever feels most comfortable. But just drop everything in the mind and just be in a state of knowing, of being conscious. And as I say, we can do this anytime during the day, not while you're driving, maybe. But any other time, it just will last, usually at the beginning, just a few seconds, but it revitalizes the mind enormously, and especially if the mind is feeling stressed out and harried and, tense, then just at that moment, just let everything go and just is very helpful. It refreshes the mind very much. It's a mini retreat, very mini.
Periods during the day that we want to dedicate to meditation. What conditions are best for doing shamatha on an object, and what conditions are best? I mean, how do we know whether we should be doing shamatha based focused on an object or object-less?
Well, normally, even, he's asking about what are the best conditions for doing shamatha with an object, shamatha without an object. The best conditions is when you remember to do it. Because, we can at any time bring our attention to the breath. We can at any time bring our attention to the mind. We can at any time drop it all and just be. There's no special conditions except that we remember to do it, honestly and truthfully. Even it just takes 1 or 2 minutes. It's not that it's going to take anything from your day. Yes, it's good to do formal sitting. Maybe first thing in the morning when you get up to do, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, half an hour, whatever you can afford. Of formal sitting. But during the day, as often as we remember, just to bring the attention back to the breath, to the mind, and then just let it go. It takes, 2 minutes. Nobody even knows. It's not that you suddenly have to zap yourself into lotus posture and sit there, at your desk. You just rest, Nobody knows what you're doing, isn't it? I was told at the beginning to 3 times every hour to bring the mind back to looking at the mind, to observing the mind. And so, you know, that again, it only lasts it just brings us back. In this moment, what are we thinking? You know, what is the mind doing in this moment? 3 times every hour, you know, 1 minute, just looking. It's actually very good for the mind, really, really. And it helps the mind to become settled so that we become actually more efficient than endlessly just scrambling around and around and around and never getting ourselves centered. It's a matter of just becoming more centered again. So it's something which we can carry with us into our daily lives. It's not just something that you have to go into a long-term retreat or whatever. Of course, nice if we can do that. But if people go into retreat and then when they come out of retreat, they completely drop the whole thing, then it hasn't been very useful. It's much more useful to have the remembrance to carry this practice into our daily life and integrate it with our daily life so that we become more and more focused, more and more centered. And in this way, the Dharma and our life become merged, they become one. It's not that when we come on retreats, when we go to Dharma centers, when we, you know, read talks or listen to podcasts, then we're practicing and the rest of the time is just worldly activity. It's very important to bring the two together and place the Dharma at the center of our lives, because otherwise it's not going to transform. It has to become something which we carry with us all the time. And it's not hard. Please believe me, you know, the difficulty is remembering. This is why, you know, the word for mindfulness literally means in Sanskrit and in Tibetan to remember. And so its direct opponent is that we forget. Not that it's difficult, but that we forget to remember. And so this is our, you know, we are habituated to be unmindful. So that's why it takes effort to bring ourselves back and to be more attentive. That's all. That's the only obstacle. Otherwise, the actual practice is very simple. But we forget to do it. And to integrate it with our daily lives as much as we can. In Thich Nhat Hanh's Sangha, they have, Thich Nhat Hanh is this Vietnamese master, yes? They have what is called a mindfulness bell. So during the hour, and I think not at any set time, but just sometimes, it goes, and then everybody drops what they're doing for half a minute and is conscious of their deportment, of the state of their mind, and then they carry on. So some people have mindfulness spells on their telephones. Yes, and then this is a very good idea because, you know, ping, ping, and then everything snaps into awareness. That's the only reason we have a telephone. There's Boaz, he says. He's the authority here. So if you don't have a mindfulness bell on your telephone, please get one. It's a very skillful means of reminding us, and all we need is to be reminded. It's the actual, just knowing what we're doing while we're doing it is not so difficult. The problem is we forget. And so anything that we can come up with which will help us to remember is a good thing. Okay? So, sorry, goodness. Okay, so now we're going to just try this. It's very simple. The important thing is not to try. Okay? It's a non-trying exercise. We are going to first we are going to bring up our awareness. We can start with the breath, just to get us centered. Then bring that attention to the mind. If we have problems watching the mind stream, don't worry, no problem. We can all watch the breath. If you can watch the mind as well, that's very good. But if you can't, don't worry about that. That's not important at this stage. What is important is that there is something which is observing. What we're observing at this point is not important. So we observe the breath or we observe the mind. Then at a certain point, just drop the object and just keep the awareness. And the mind takes over again, fine, go back to the object again, and then drop it. That's all. It's very simple. And the problem is just that simple doesn't always mean easy, merely because we think we have to do something. Soto Zen is very based on this sense of just sitting and just to sit, they say. Sitting just to sit. You're not trying to do anything. We're trying to just be conscious of our consciousness, which is always there, but we don't recognize it. Just as the space is always here, but we don't see it. But we can be aware that there is space. So likewise, we can be aware of being aware. Okay? Everybody understand? Yes, good. Okay, so where are we? Okay, we'll sit just for 10 minutes and just relax. Very important, just to relax the mind, keep the mind very spacious, but just very conscious. Now we come on to the third of the Brahma Viharas, or the illimitables, which in Sanskrit is called mudita. Mudita means rejoicing. It is we started with giving loving kindness to ourselves and all beings, then, which means being happy in their happiness, wishing them happiness. May all beings be well and happy. Then the cultivation of compassion. May all beings be free from suffering. Now, this third one is rejoicing in the good fortune of all beings, including ourselves. And it's the direct antidote to jealousy and envy. And at the same time, it is a recognition of the goodness within ourselves and others. So it's a very important quality of the heart to cultivate, especially if we overemphasize compassion and get very depressed at the sufferings of all beings, or we are very self-critical and always zeroing in on all our faults and failings. This is the antidote to that. So we will start with the idea of it being an antidote for jealousy and envy. It means that when something good happens to somebody else, when somebody gets something which makes them happy, they get a promotion, or they get some good fortune happening to them, or they get the person that they would like to have, and so forth. Even if it is from our point of view at our expense, that they got a promotion I think should have gotten, or they get into a relationship which was the one I wanted to have, and so forth. Instead of feeling jealous and envious, which is not only a very ugly emotion, but a very painful emotion, we rejoice in their happiness. We think, how lovely for them. They must be so happy. I'm happy, they're happy. I have often thought it would, of course, annihilate sport. If you have two football teams and then, but imagine the feeling in a football team, right? One is going to win, one is going to lose. So if you win, you're happy. And if you lose, you're happy. Right? You're happy for the other side. Well, how wonderful. The other side is so happy now. Well, good for them. And that sense of open-heartedness, that we're not only closed in on our own benefits, but we open the heart to exchange ourselves with others and imagine how wonderful it would be, how happy they must be feeling at this point, and just feeling happy they're happy. Why are we so mean-spirited? I mean, so it's a very beautiful emotion that we rejoice in others' happiness, even if it was something which we ourselves would have liked for ourselves. It doesn't matter. They're happy, so we're happy. So then everybody, it's a win-win situation. Everybody's happy. And so this quality of rejoicing in the goodness in the world. Sometimes we get very focused in on all that's wrong and all the dark side and, the inequalities and the sufferings and, all the bad things. So it's very important to sometimes think of all the good things. All the good things. Every country, every nation, every household, every person has things which are not so good and other things which are very good. As I said before, it's like a garden, The garden may be full of weeds and we're trying to pull out the weeds, but we should not ignore the beautiful flowers and other plants. We don't have a garden just to spend our time pulling out weeds. We have to admire the flowers and water them and encourage them. Many beautiful people, many beautiful things happening. Many of the systems which you have in place are very good, very efficient, very helpful for many people. Lots of good things in this country. We shouldn't only zero in on what's wrong. We should also appreciate what's right. Appreciation, gratitude is a very important quality of the heart. And so it's important not, because otherwise if we're only looking at what's wrong, there's always going to be something wrong. I mean, there's nowhere that you can point out is perfection. This is samsara. Samsara by its very nature is unsatisfactory. But if we only zero in on what's wrong, then we end up feeling depressed and depleted and frustrated and just, hopeless. So it's very important. That doesn't help. That doesn't help. Yes, we have to see what is wrong and try to help deal with that, but we also have to appreciate what is right and encourage that and rejoice in that. Lift up the heart. It's very important. There is goodness. It's like when we read newspapers, then it's full of all that's wrong. They don't mention what's right. Fortunately, in one way, I think, because as long as disasters, bad news is news, then that's a good thing. It's when bad news is no longer news that you're in trouble. So even though bad news is what they regard as news, that doesn't mean there is not goodness in happening at the same time. Lots and lots of goodness. But that is taken for granted, so it's not news. Right? Only the bad things are considered worth mentioning. The good things, well, we can take those for granted. But we shouldn't take them for granted. We should rejoice in that. All the goodness in this world. All the goodness in society. All the goodness around us. And all the goodness in ourselves too. So also, sometimes when people get onto a spiritual path, they tend to emphasize all that's wrong in themselves. And we put the spotlight on all our faults, with our anger and our greed, our jealousies, our irritability, our this, our that. It's always something. And we start to identify with those negative qualities and limit ourselves by our negative qualities and ignore all the goodness in us. And then the worse we feel about ourselves, somehow the more spiritual we feel. And this is completely wrong. It completely undermines our courage. Shantideva, a great 7th century Indian Pandit, said that there is a vast difference between pride and arrogance, which of course is a mental defilement, is something very negative. There's a big difference between arrogance and self-confidence. Self-confidence is essential. We have to believe that we can walk the path. If we don't believe we can walk the path, then we won't. And then that becomes just actually the idea of self-worthlessness is one of the forms of laziness. Think about that. One of the forms of laziness is the idea that I can't do it because I'm not good enough. Because, I'm a bad person and I'm useless and I've never achieved anything, and obviously I'm never going to get anywhere on this path, so I'm not going to even bother. And it's an excuse not to try. So therefore, this quality of mudita, of rejoicing and appreciating goodness, is a very important quality, not only for appreciating our friends, our family, our neighborhood, our nation, the world, or the goodness that is around us, and the beauty that is around us, but also within us. To appreciate the goodness within us and encourage that. Put the spotlight on what is right, not just with what is wrong. This is very important. Doesn't mean that we become arrogant and self-satisfied, but it means we encourage ourselves. We need to encourage ourselves. We need to believe in our essential goodness. You know, the Buddha Dharma very much emphasizes that our true nature is Buddha nature. And so, you know, we cannot say that there's anything wrong in Buddha nature. And that's our true nature. All the rest are just bad habits that we have learned, but which can be eradicated or transformed. It's not our true nature. So therefore, it's very important to remember that inherently we are good. Inherently we are completely perfect. There's nothing wrong within our essential nature. All these other things have to be worked with. And our weaknesses, our faults, our shortcomings, these are the path. This is what we have to work with. If we were so perfect, we wouldn't need a path. We'd already be there. The fact that we need training is because, you know, we still have things to work on. But that is the path, is working on our shortcomings and cultivating what is already good within us. For example, if one is very short-tempered, easily gets angry, has a lot of you know, anger and frustration, aggression especially inside us. But at the same time, one is perhaps quite generous. You know, a lot of people who are very angry-minded are nonetheless at the same time very open-handed. So then one takes that the anger in one's heart and starts to work on that, using various techniques for overcoming anger. I mean, there are whole books written on how to deal with anger from many different levels, many different ways. Different things work for different people. But one takes that as that, you know, this is what one is going to really focus on, right? Dealing with the anger in my heart. This is my challenge to transform that. At the same time, one does not overlook the fact that something which is easy for us, which is being generous, and one recognizes that that is one's strength and encourages more and opens up the whole idea of giving, not just materially, but giving time, giving help, being there for others, etc. So the two come together. And one acknowledges one's goodness. It's very important. Otherwise it all gets very unbalanced. And one recognizes the goodness in others. Nobody is completely bad. Everybody has goodness and also faults. Some people have more faults, less goodness. Some people have more goodness, less faults. But we're all a mixture. And we can recognize both and acknowledge both and rejoice in the goodness. So this quality of mudita is very important, and especially if we tend to get a bit depressed. because the depression comes from focusing only on the negative and not on appreciating the goodness, the beautiful, and being grateful. We have so much. We have so much. Even, you know, here, everybody, you are not only well fed and well clothed in a very clean and healthy environment, but you're also well educated. You can think. Not only can you think for yourselves, but you can read what you want. And not only can you read what you want, but you can understand it because you're educated. And you know, even in this part of the world, how rare that is, especially for the women. So be grateful. Okay? Somebody falling? Asleep? So this quality of gratitude and appreciation is very important. You know, we tend to take things for granted and not appreciate and how advantaged we are in so many ways. So to appreciate that and to cultivate that is very important. So this quality of mudita is a very, it tends to be put in a shade compared with the first two of loving kindness and compassion. But in itself, it is a very important quality to develop because we tend to overlook it. We tend to, as I say, overlook the goodness in ourselves and others, and we also tend to, when other people, you know, are advantaged and we feel at a disadvantage, instead of being happy for them, we tend to begrudge them. And then we get all upset and angry and jealous, or at least we are not rejoicing in their happiness. And so just sitting and thinking of people who have got something that they really want and just feeling how wonderful that must be to be them at this moment, how wonderful for them, lifts the heart. And stops the heart becoming so tightly concerned only with me and mine. It makes the mind much more open, not just to the sufferings of others, but to the joys of others. And especially towards those people that maybe we have a hard time for. For example, we are happy when a member of our family gets something happening good for them, then we rejoice naturally. But that's because we, the family or our friends, are an extension of ourselves, right? So then it's easy to rejoice in the happiness of someone that we like. But of course, as we all know, the challenge is to rejoice in the happiness of someone that we either feel very indifferent towards or feel some antagonism towards. That to really be happy for them is a very beautiful quality of the heart and should not be overlooked. Along with feeling sadness for their sorrows, we should also feel happiness for their joys. So this is, as I say, really a very important quality that, again, is something which it's not something you sit down and meditate on particularly. It's something which occurs during daily life.
When you practice it, how can you tell that it's not practiced?
It's a good question. Okay, so she's asking basically, okay, we know we have to do this, so somebody gets something that we would really have liked, but we remind ourselves we are supposed to rejoice in that. And so we say, okay, I'm happy for you. How can we know if it's really genuine or if it's artificial? Well, like most things, in the beginning it's artificial. But if we keep working at it, eventually when something happens, you feel an inner joy arising in the heart. You know, there's a big difference between outer joys, which just are depending on something nice happening, you know, something pleasing happens to us and then we feel all happy about it, joyful. And the inner joy, which arises just spontaneously at something which is happening. Like if you read of somebody getting something somewhere quite not attached to us at all, but one just spontaneously rejoices for them. That is a very genuine sense of joy in the joy of others. Meantime, if it's somebody we know who gets something which we would have liked, but they got it instead, and we say, well, I'm happy for you. That's the first step. That's the first step. Just remembering that we are supposed to be happy for them. We can be honest with ourselves and say, actually, I don't really feel that happy. You know, I wish that happened to me, not to you. And I'm actually feeling quite jealous. And that's okay, right? You know, we have to be honest. We can't pretend. We can say, right now, I'm really jealous that you got that, and I would have liked it for myself. And we recognize that feeling, and we accept that feeling. But then we can think, okay, right now honestly, I'm feeling quite jealous. But that feeling of jealousy does not make me feel better, and it doesn't help them. So I'm going to work on it now. And so then we try to think how it would be if we were them and how happy they are right now. And then really genuinely try to feel it from their point of view instead of our point of view. And even though at first it's artificial, like anything, you know, as I say, like you're practicing an instrument. At first it's very hard and our fingers hit all the wrong keys. And it sounds terrible. But if we keep practicing and practicing, finally the music plays for us. So one time, if we keep doing this, one time somebody will get something which we really wanted, and they got it. And spontaneously, joy and delight will come in our heart for them. As a result of working on it again and again and again. You know, eventually artificial becomes genuine. But it won't if we don't practice. This is why daily life is so important. Because then, you know, during daily life, when you hear of anybody getting something nice, we can rejoice just for a moment. Oh, how lovely, they must be so happy. I'm so happy they're happy, right? And then we get used to the idea of rejoicing in others' happiness. You know, just as we feel so sad when we hear that something sorrowful happened. You know, at that moment, we empathize. It's empathy. This is why it's sometimes translated as sympathetic, not meaning sorrowful, but sympathy meaning in tune with, you know, feeling with somebody. So it's sympathetic or empathetic joy, you know, because you're feeling with that person for their happiness. And it's like anything, we work at it, you know, honestly. We don't pretend. You know, if we feel jealous, we know we're jealous, but we know that actually it's not such a good thing to be jealous because it's a negative emotion which hurts us, doesn't help them, doesn't help anything. So this is good. Now I can see I feel very jealous. Now let's see if I can work on this emotion and try to soften it up a bit until finally genuine delight in others' happiness will arise. Yes, we have to work. It's like we're working on very tough leather, and you have to keep massaging it and working on it until it becomes supple and soft. You know, in the beginning it's very hard, but if we keep working, eventually it becomes, you know, very, very easily, you know, very supple, very flexible. The mind has to become what is called lesurumwa, which means workable, literally. We are working on our mind to make it serviceable, flexible, supple, so that we can work on it, use it nicely, to form it into anything we need to form it into, which is wholesome and skillful. So in the beginning we get resistance because the mind is very hard and unflexible, unsupple, unworkable. That's our challenge. To change this very obdurate, habit-formed mind, full of very negative reactions, into something which is open and supple and helpful on the path. It's no longer our opponent, it's our helper. So these qualities of learning, loving kindness and compassion and joy in the happiness of others is a way of making our minds workable. But like anything, it needs work to make it workable. You know, you have to work at it to make it supple. It's not just going to go like this. Oh yes, this is a brilliant idea. Boom, the mind changes. You know, we have very deep habit patterns which have to be transformed. The good thing is they can be transformed. The Buddha himself said, if we could not change, I would not ask you to change. But since we can change, I'm telling you, change. Right? And it's true, we can change.
What if someone maybe like step on someone in order to get what he wanted?
So if someone gains some advantage through unskillful means, like stepping over someone else and in some way getting their advantages in a negative way, but at the same time they're very happy about it, how should we react? I think we should react by feeling compassion. I think compassion would be a more appropriate emotion than rejoicing, because they've just made very bad karma and they have also caused suffering to others, so we don't need to rejoice in that. But we can feel very sorry for their short-term view, and that, you know, what they have done was very unskillful. Sorry, yes?
Aren't we getting in danger of judgment if we start thinking, this joy I'm going to feel good with, but that joy I don't think is...
Of course we're judging. Good God, I mean, if we don't judge, then what? Of course. I mean, when we are sitting, meditating, watching the mind, we are not judging. We're just, these are thoughts. But during the day, we should be very, very careful to distinguish between skillful and unskillful states of mind. Otherwise, how will we change? Absolutely. This is why we are observing the mind, not only to recognize that these are thoughts, but to recognize these are skillful thoughts and emotions, these are unskillful thoughts and emotions. And to transform unskillful emotions into skillful ones, and to cultivate more and more skillful ones. Of course we have to judge. Huh? Sorry, I can't hear. What? Yes. Yes. Well, we have gotten, you know, our roots of negativity, like our anger and greed, jealousy, and so forth, are very deep-rooted. But however, the good news is that they are not part of our inherent nature. If they were part of our true being, we'd be in trouble. But because they are not, because they are just unskillful patterns which we have learned from a Buddhist point of view since beginningless time, we can uproot them. They are like, if you consider a silver pot, right? Think of a silver pot. So that's, I mean, don't push analogies too far. But if we think of our true mind like a nice piece of silver, then if we just leave it without polishing it, it becomes tarnished. So it gets very, very black. And so when we look at it, what we see is this black. And we think, oh, the nature of this pot is black. But that is only the tarnish. If we polish and rub it, then we get back to the silver. And the silver has never been tarnished, right? The black, however thick the black outside, it never changes the nature of the actual silver. The silver is always silver, right? So this is the point, is that yes, our minds are very tarnished. And when we look in them, we can see the tarnish very clearly. But we know that if we just work on it and really start polishing, then eventually we will get back to that silver, which in itself has never been polluted. It's always there. That's the true nature, is the silver, not the tarnish. Tarnish is impermanent. The goodness is enduring. So this is why, you know, we should not just focus in on the tarnish. We should always remember the silver, because that's our true nature. You know, we shouldn't identify with the tarnish. Tarnish can be cleaned away. You understand? It's very important to remember that, because we tend to identify with all that gunk on top, and that's not our true nature. We're really sparkling clean underneath it all. Everybody, no matter what we do. You know, there is a story in the sutras of this bandit called Angulimala, which means a necklace of fingers. And he was taught by his teacher that he had to go and kill 100 people and take their fingers and then bring it back to offer to his master. So he had killed 99 people. And then he was looking for the 100th. And he saw the Buddha walking by. So he started running after the Buddha. And the Buddha just kept walking, but Angulimala couldn't catch up with him, however hard he ran, even though the Buddha was walking slowly. And then Angulimala said to the Buddha, "Stop, stop." And the Buddha said, "I have stopped, Angulimala. Do you also stand still?" And then Angulimala got it. And he became an arahat. He became completely perfect. He had just killed 99 people. But the moment he got it, he got it. And then he became a monk, and then people started throwing things at him because they knew. And the Buddha said, you know, this is just the wheel of your karma running slow. You've done so much harm. Of course, you're going to get some back, but don't worry about it. You just meditate on loving kindness. It's all right. Anyway, he became one of the most important arahats. He attained nirvana. So the point with that is that it doesn't matter how badly we have acted in the past. That is not our true nature. As soon as we get the point, then all that drops away, because, you know, we're identifying with all the wrong things. Please always remember that for everybody, no matter what they've done, they have Buddha nature. Without exception. So we have half an hour left. Any more questions? Maybe I should deal with some of these questions. So your knower has to change into knowing, right? That's the point. There's no knower or known, there's knowing. You understand? So drop the knower. Yes, yes.
I would like to ask about a feeling that I didn't find in the text. In the Lord John text, it said that when someone hurts us very badly, we have to see in that person as a supreme teacher.
Mm-hmm.
But I try and I look to read more about this, about the feeling of being offended from a friend, from someone that we love, being hurt. And even though
Just a minute. So she's talking about in the Lojong, these mind training teachings, which stemmed from Palmo in the 10th century. A lot of the training is on when people do harmful things to us or say harmful things to us, then that instead of feeling offended and upset, that we regard them as our greatest teacher. Yes.
So I'm asking about the situation when a friend, someone that we really love, we really care, and we do our best with him, turned out to be. So the first step is the anger goes away, but still the offense is rest. I really try looking for something in the text about this feeling, and I didn't find.
Well, I mean, the 8 verses, as you know, are especially dealing with that. The 8 verses of mind training, it specifically says, especially someone that we have helped and that we have trusted and what we love, and then they turn against us and do things to harm us, etc., that we take them as our teacher. What it means is that we need to learn how to develop genuine forbearance and patience. Before we go any further with that, I should say that if one is, for example, finds oneself in a very abusive situation, it doesn't mean that one just has to allow people to be abusive to us. We can stand up to abuse, and we can even be forcefully standing up to abuse. But we do it not from a mind of anger or hurt, but from a mind of compassion, right? Because we recognize that they are just creating a lot of really very negative karma, and it doesn't help them to be abusive. So one can prevent the abuse, but and sometimes the other side of Chenrezig here, this is the Bodhisattva of compassion, who is white and smiling and holding lotuses and so forth and looking just how we would imagine compassion to look. But his other aspect is Mahakala, the great black one, who is very wrathful and the chief of the protectors. And so he is very powerful and flames coming out, and very terrifying. But his actions are still based on compassion. He's not acting out of anger, he's acting out of compassion. So sometimes in the face of very aggressive, violent opposition, one needs sometimes to appear also aggressive and violent, but in that case one has to be sure that one is acting from compassion and not just from retaliation and anger. I think that needs to be explained. because it doesn't mean that one just lies down and says, kick me harder. It doesn't mean that. Sometimes, negative actions have to be dealt with very firmly. But nonetheless, from the attitude of wisdom and compassion, not just from the attitude of retaliation and revenge and aggression, which only will perpetuate the cycle. So with someone who one loves and trusts and has helped a lot, and then they turn around and bite the hand that feeds them, as we say, the point is then that is the most challenging for us to really develop forbearance and loving kindness and compassion. And because that is the most difficult for us, therefore we should be very grateful to them, because they are really giving us a challenge. It's easy to be loving, kind, and whatever to people that we're not particularly, don't have any particular reason to think they should be grateful to us. But to those people that we have been kind to, that we have helped, that we have taken care of, that we trusted, when they turn around and are mean to us in any way, then that is very, very painful. And for that reason, all the more reason why we should feel grateful to them, because that's really challenging our ability to show loving kindness and compassion and forbearance. That's why we place them on our head as our teacher. You understand?
I understand it.
Yes, so keep working at it. You have to work. All of these qualities, are actually the reactions of an 8th level bodhisattva, to be honest, right? A very highly realized being, these reactions would come naturally. We are not 8th level bodhisattvas, right? We're not probably even 1st level bodhisattvas. So we have to work at it. How are we going to be an 8th level bodhisattva if we don't work? Right? This is the whole point. If it was so easy, then there wouldn't, then that's wonderful. But the fact is, we're not going to learn anything. We have to learn from very hard lessons. And the harder the lesson, the more, if we finally accomplish it, have we made progress. Right? If it's easy, then what have we learned? The fact that it's so tough is where we really have to get our muscles, right? Like going to a gym. If it's an easy machine, well, it's very pleasant, but we're not doing anything. We're not going to get strong muscles. It's those machines that really challenge us that are going to make us strong. So in life, those people and those circumstances which really push our buttons, instead of feeling all upset and angry or defeated, we can say, thank you. This is really something I've got to work on here. This is something that you've really handed me, a practice that I'm going to have to really, really cultivate and work on and be honest with myself and really, really get my teeth into. So thank you for that. You're so awful. I'm really grateful. You understand? Yeah, well, you have to work at it. I'm telling you, all of these things, it all sounds very nice, but they are not platitudes. They are not platitudes. Many Tibetans also, they had so many hardships, and some of them, especially, lamas and others, just because they were lamas, they were imprisoned for like 25, 30 years. Many of them in hard labor camps, many of them tortured and interrogated for years and years and years. Far worse than anything in this present day that you're going to experience, even if, your past histories of your race are different, but in this particular time, not. So they went through all of that. And when they came out, I mean, I have met a number of lamas who were in prison for 25, 30 years and interrogated, tortured, hard labor camps, all of that. And you look in their eyes and they're glowing, shining with love and compassion. And they say, I'm so grateful to the guards and the interrogators. Because before this, in the monastery, yes, we read about compassion. Yes, we read about patience. Yes, we read about loving kindness. We thought we knew. But until I was faced with my interrogator, I had no idea what compassion really meant. So I'm so grateful to them. They were my greatest teachers. And you see it from their eyes and their big grins, and they're so happy. They're so grateful. Because through that experience, which might have broken many, they arose so strong, so powerful in their compassion and their love and their understanding. Our greatest challenges are our greatest opportunities. Never forget that.
I have a funny question, but it comes very strong with me. I have a problem and a difficulty to have rejoicing to a success for a leader that I think damage. And I also have, when I try to have compassion for that, I forbid it, so I can have full compassion to a man, but not for his success. So what is the next step for me? Maybe.
You mean you don't rejoice in the happiness of someone who's doing something which you don't approve of? Well, this is what this lady was asking.
When I'm asking for myself, how can I have compassion for his success? And
no, you don't have compassion for his success. You have compassion for his delusion. You know that he is so pleased with himself when he's doing something which is so negative and wrong. So what you have compassion with is for his ignorance. That he's so pleased with himself when he's causing so much harm. Right? You understand? You're not pleased with his success because his success is harming others and is actually harming himself, even he doesn't realize it. So what you have compassion with is his delusion, his ignorance, his lack of understanding that causes him to act unskillfully and create policies which cause so much harm for others. That's what you have compassion with. And for those who are the victims of the wrong policies. Right? You understand? I mean, we rejoice in the goodness of others. We don't rejoice in their evil actions.
yeah, it's true. And I understand, thank you so much. And still, it's in my opinion, also I have to remember it because there is a lot of people that think completely different.
Oh, don't worry about what other people think. I mean, the important thing is to see clearly, are these actions which others are creating causing happiness for others, or are they causing more problems? And if they're causing more problems, then they are unskillful, and we should feel sorry for them that they are creating so many unskillful actions which are creating problems in the future for themselves, although they don't know it, and especially for others, you know. So then one's empathy is towards.
So I wonder, what are the forces that pushes the ego to go and kind of kill himself in the end? Like what's
Yeah, it's an interesting point. He's remarking that I said that in actual fact, although the Buddhism is very anti-self, our sense of self, our sense of ego is for most of the way going to be walking on the path. So therefore, why is it that the ego is willing to walk on a path which is leading to the death of the ego? And this is a very good point. And it's the main reason why the ego puts up opposition. You know, I can't do this. This is too difficult. Yes, I want to do this, but there's something else I have to do first, etc. The laziness of the mind, the inertia and resistance to practice comes from the ego, which recognizes this may be a very dodgy path to be walking. Plus the fact that when we start to meditate, often the reaction which comes up is fear. Many people, when they get into deeper levels of meditation, the emotion which arises is fear. And this again is a defense of the ego, which recognizes that it could be either because there's some trauma which is hidden, which when the mind settles down is able to come up, some memory which previously was suppressed by the business of mind. But often it's just a very existential fear of the ego. So this again is why we need to encourage ourselves. According to the Yogacara system, there are 8 levels of consciousness. In general Buddhism, there are 6 levels. That's the 5 sense consciousnesses and the mental consciousness. In the Chittamatra system, there are 8 levels of consciousness, of which the 6 ordinary levels, and then the 8th, which is called the alaya vijnana, the store consciousness. In Tibetan, this is called the kunji, which means the substratum consciousness. And this is where it is believed that all our memories and all our karmas are stored. It's like the bottom of the ocean. The conceptual mind is the waves on the top of the ocean, and then you go down when you go into deeper levels of meditation, you start going down in the ocean and you meet up with, you know, dolphins and goldfish and sharks and all sorts of, you know, monsters of the deep as we go deeper. And then you hit the floor of the ocean, which is the 8th consciousness, called the store consciousness, where all our memories and all our karmas are stored. Now, between the 8th consciousness and the 6th consciousness is the 7th consciousness. And that is like the bridge between the 8th consciousness, the substratum store consciousness, and our mental surface consciousness. And that is where the seat of the idea I arises, according to the Chittamatra system. Why is this that everything we do, we have this kind of underlying idea of me? I think, I do, I feel. Always I at the center of it all, which is what the Buddha said, if you search for, you will never find. According to Chittamatra, this is the 7th consciousness. It links between the 8th consciousness and the 7th consciousness. And it's called the Klishna Mano Vijnana, which means an afflicted mental consciousness. It's afflicted because it is based on ignorance, because this sense of solid, enduring, unchanging me at the center of everything from a Buddhist perspective is the root of ignorance. So it's an afflicted consciousness. It's not a genuine consciousness. But at the same time, it is karmically neither negative nor positive, depending on what the ego is up to. So if the ego is under the dominion, under the control of negative emotions, like anger and greed and jealousy and so forth, then that creates negative karma, the sense of I. But if the I is conjoined with loving kindness, compassion, devotion to the path, and so forth, then it creates positive karma, right? So therefore, the ego in itself is not negative or positive. It can go either way depending what we use it for. And this is why we need to encourage ourselves, right? We have to encourage the ego, that this will make the ego feel ever so much nicer and better. And, eventually our sense of well-being, if we encourage it, recognizing that as we go on the path, actually we will feel better ourselves, and then we will be able to give much more happiness and joy to others. Actually, the ego cooperates, even though eventually, as our wisdom deepens, the ego will dissolve. And so, of course, on one level, this is death to the ego. But nonetheless, in the meantime, the ego actually can become our friend. This is why loving kindness and compassion and so forth to ourselves is so important. You see, you're giving it to the ego. The true nature of the mind doesn't need loving kindness and compassion. The true nature of the mind is perfectly okay. It doesn't need us to help it along. But the ego does. Our sense of self needs to be encouraged, needs to have someone empathize with its suffering and give it lots of loving kindness and friendship. We need to make a friend of our ego and encourage it to help us on the path. And it will. It will. But what we need is a healthy, balanced sense of self. A healthy, balanced sense of self in order to walk the path towards non-self. An injured self will not be able to walk. So this is why the Buddha taught shamatha, which in order to go to deeper levels, the psyche needs to be very balanced. And then feelings of great joy, great bliss, great clarity arise as, in serious shamatha practice, you go into various very deep levels of meditation and concentration. And these are shown by the level of clarity, concentration, bliss, and so forth, which arise, which heal the ego. So that then, with this healthy, strong sense of self, we can walk the path of insight and wisdom, which will eventually lead to the dissolution of the ego, because the ego doesn't really exist. So it's not that we're killing something substantial. We're not really killing it, we're dissolving it. It's like a big lump of salt. It's not that we have to kill the salt. We just put it in water and eventually it dissolves, So this is the point, is that gradually as our insight deepens, based on a very healthy sense of inner confidence and awareness that our true nature is completely perfect, there's nothing wrong, and all beings likewise, then slowly it's like if the body is hurting, like the arm, if we have an arm which is hurting, we've broken our arm, then we have to protect that arm. We can't use it. Its ability to be effective is seriously affected. We can't use it very well. And we're protecting it the whole time and thinking about it. And if anybody touches it, ow! So we're always protecting it and concerned about it. But when our arm heals, then it's an arm. We're not thinking my arm every minute. And we're using it for whatever needs to be done. And if somebody hits it, ow, but we've forgotten it. It's not important. It's just an arm which we're using. And likewise with the ego. If the ego is injured, then we're always thinking me, 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 which is why psychologists are so popular. But once, and then if anybody says anything to offend us, we're very offended and we hold it in our heart and, oh, I have been hurt, right? And we're only thinking me, me, me. But once the sense of self is healthy, then we don't have to think about ourselves. We're not so important. Other beings, their happiness is much more meaningful to us. And we want to give them happiness and remove their suffering, not from a sense of injury to forget our own, but from a sense of healthiness. Do you understand? So this is why Buddhism first emphasizes we have to get ourselves together in order to really be of benefit to others. And so when our sense of self is healthy, we are not thinking of ourselves so much. We're thinking of others and their happiness and well-being. But at the same time, on that path, slowly the sense of self, due to wisdom and compassion, begins to just dissolve away. So the ego is very helpful in the beginning. But we need to get a healthy, happy, helpful sense of self, right? I mean, we can't just say, oh, Buddhism says there's no self, right, that's it, I don't mean that. Doesn't mean we don't exist. What it means is we don't exist how we think we do, that we identify with all the wrong things. Of course we exist. But we don't exist in the way that our ordinary surface conceptual mind imagines it to be. That's all.
I have a related question. I really relate to that. When I meet the quiet in the shamatha,
She's saying that when she does shamatha practice and she encounters the silence and the emptiness of the mind, then she freaks out and she panics. So the point is just to relax into that silence and emptiness, and with a sense of curiosity. You know, now what? You know? Because many people, you know, we're used to being standing with our feet firmly on the ground. When the ground falls away, at first we feel vertigo. But we need to be able to free fly. Yes, dear.
I want to ask, how can I do from learning in such? How can I?
So it's a very valid question. She's asking how, in the practice of Tonglen, can she take on the suffering of others when she herself feels very fragile and not strong enough? Well, if you really feel, I mean, it's a two-way thing, I think. First of all, you can practice more loving kindness to yourself and compassion to make yourself more strong. And also, interestingly enough, if we are able to open ourselves to take in the suffering of others, sometimes that makes us strong. The ego fools itself into thinking, I can't take this, but actually it can. And sometimes if we only think about the ego and its own problems, and we don't open ourselves out to the suffering and the problems of others, that keeps the ego being feeling very vulnerable. And if we relax into taking on the suffering of another and accepting it, actually it might be a way of strengthening the inner sense of compassion, which is your true nature. We always should remember that compassion and loving kindness are a reflection of our true nature. And inside us, they're infinite. It's only our ego which is saying it's limited. My compassion is for this one and not for that one. That is just the ego talking. In actual fact, if we could only open up our heart, our compassion and loving kindness are infinite. So try a little bit. Okay? Encourage yourself towards someone that you care about. Imagine how wonderful it would be if they could be free from their suffering. Because that will help you break out of the prison house of your ego. Right? It's your ego which is causing you the suffering. Do you understand? You know, we are trapped in our fear for ourself and protecting ourselves, and we think, oh, I have enough problems, I cannot take on the problems of somebody else, that would overwhelm me. But ironically, it doesn't. When people are very depressed, seriously depressed, and they have real serious ego depletion, then the advice nowadays is to go out and physically help someone else even worse off. Not just, put stamps on letters to charities, but go out there and really deal with somebody who's homeless or who is really sick and dying. Get out there and meet someone who's worse off than you are, so that your heart opens up. And they say that's the best cure for depression.
I feel that I am inclined towards compassion, but it's too much because it affects me too much. The suffering of others affects me for my own suffering.
But because you are not using wisdom with it. In Buddhism, compassion is always conjoined with an understanding. So the problem is that you're taking in the suffering of others and it's sitting like a great big lump inside you. And you are not able to dissolve it. So it's very important to cultivate the understanding that really, you take someone like His Holiness the Dalai Lama as an example. Because of his position, people come every day to tell him their sad stories. Not just Tibetans, but people from all around the world. There is so much suffering in the world. And people come and they tell him because they know he will understand and empathize. And so when they tell him their sad stories, he cries. He absolutely feels what they're saying and he sobs. But then 5 minutes later, he's laughing away. Right? And when you meet him, you see a being of joy, even though he's also a being of great compassion. The bodhisattva of compassion here is smiling. He's not crying, right? He's not looking, it's too much, I can't deal with it. So it's very important that we empathize with the sufferings of others, but also that we develop a practice like shamatha, for example, or vipassana, which helps us to take that heavy lump and dissolve it back into emptiness. This is not just theoretical, this is very practical. Loving kindness along with compassion, they have to balance. You have to give in joy, because if we only focus in on the sufferings and we make it something very solid and very real, then we just end up being overwhelmed. So we need a counterbalance. And that counterbalance, the best counterbalance, of course, is a realization of emptiness, obviously. But apart from that, which is the best, is to recognize it's not something solid and real, and to be able to open it up and make it much more open and spacious. Apart from that, then there's an emphasis on loving kindness towards others and towards oneself, not just compassion, but really wishing well to yourself, to others, and to do a shamatha in which the mind becomes very open and spacious, not something which just stays heavy in the heart. Dissolve it. Imagine it dissolving, and becoming vast and open. You could also, well, no, I guess you wouldn't. Okay, I was going to say you could imagine someone like Chenrezig or Tara in your heart, but maybe you don't like to see images so much. So imagine a light in your heart, that will do. A nice big globe of light, and all this suffering, all this comes into the heart and then is dissipated. It disappears, all that darkness. When you're doing Tonglen, it's very important that you immediately transform it into light. You don't allow the darkness to sit there in your heart. That's the point of Tonglen. That the more all the darkness comes in and is immediately feeds the light of loving kindness and compassion. The more the dark, the more the light. You don't allow the darkness just to sit inside you. It immediately transforms. Otherwise, it doesn't help anybody. It doesn't help you, doesn't help them. Genuine bodhisattvas, are really very cheerful. And we all know. I remember when one time I was in hospital and some friends were in Italy and friends came to see me, and he would sit and hold my hand and say, "Oh, poverina, poverina." And I would feel worse and worse, Yes, I'm a poverina. And then another friend would come, and he would come with all these piles of books and all these mad New Age machines for healing. And I would be laughing so much, however painful it was, that it dissipated all the gloom, right? I mean, he was also very sympathetic and had given a lot of time to thinking up all these New Age gadgets for health and healing. But he did it with a good energy. And so then, even though he also was compassionate, it didn't make me feel worse and didn't make him feel worse. We all had a good laugh, right? So it's important that, that compassion doesn't stay like a big, heavy lump inside us. It doesn't help. We have to find means of transforming it so that it can keep going. For example, the sisters of Mother Teresa who, spend their time with the poorest of the poor, they spend a lot of their day just in prayer. They fill up before they give out. It's very important not just to keep pouring out, and you never fill up. We need to fill in order to pour out. We need to breathe in as well as breathe out, right? So it's very important when we are thinking of the suffering of others and the compassion of others with something that gives joy to the heart. Otherwise, it doesn't help. It's not virtuous just to end up depressed about the suffering of the world. It prevents us from being helpful. So however we want to do it, we really have to learn how to take the suffering of the world and transform it, not just let it sit there inside us, making us feel full of despair. That is not skillful. And if we meet the great beings of this world who are genuine compassion, we see they have a joy with them. They all love to laugh. When you get these great Nobel Peace Prize winners together, like, Desmond Tutu and the Dalai Lama and Nelson Mandela and all that lot, they laugh. They have a great time. And no one can say they're not compassionate.